In the wizarding world, blood is not just biology. It's politics, power, and sometimes the beginning of the end. Decades before Voldemort rose to power, a secret list was published. A pure blood directory that named the 28 families considered uncontaminated by Muggle ancestors. Some became Death Eaters, others became heroes, and some just complained about Muggles. Today, we're going to dive deep into the history of each of these families, unraveling secrets, tragedies, and ironies that shaped the magical world. Get ready, because this journey goes far beyond what you imagine. Before we begin this true lesson in magical history, I need your help. If you're a Harry Potter fan and want in-depth content like this, click the subscribe button now. And tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this video? I love knowing where the true connoisseurs of magic come from. Now yes, let's begin our journey through the most controversial bloodlines in wizarding history. The Abbott family was one of the first names to appear in the Sacred 28, although their pure blood lineage didn't last very long. By the early 1930s, the Abbotts had already begun marrying Muggles and half-bloods, effectively disqualifying themselves from the elitist ideals the list was meant to represent. One well-known descendant, Hannah Abbott, attended Hogwarts alongside Harry Potter. She was a proud Hufflepuff and later joined Dumbledore's army before fighting in the Battle of Hogwarts. Her half-blood heritage confirmed that the Abbott line no longer maintained the so-called standard of blood purity. The death of her mother at the hands of Death Eaters made clear the family's anti-dark arts position. Hannah eventually married Neville Longbottom, proving once and for all that she wasn't remotely interested in maintaining the pure blood tradition. For a family supposedly devoted to purity, the Abbotts ended up being one of the best examples of what happens when common sense wins over magical snobbery. Little documentation exists about the Avery family, which seems appropriate, given how many of them ended up hiding behind masks as Death Eaters. The Avery name, however, extends deep into wizarding history and is one of the few that maintained pure-blood status for centuries. During both of Voldemort's rises, at least 2 Averys swore allegiance to the Dark Lord. One was part of his inner circle in the First War, and another resurfaced in the Second, desperate to convince Voldemort that he had been under the Imperious Curse the whole time. A claim Voldemort didn't find especially convincing. The Averys' enduring loyalty to dark causes makes them one of the purest examples of how obsession with pure blood and poor decision-making often go hand in hand. Few wizarding families carried a reputation as grandiose or self-destructive as the House of Black. Their motto, toujours pur, which translates to always pure, said everything you needed to know about their priorities. The family traced their lineage back to the Middle Ages, proudly connecting themselves to nearly every other major pure-blood clan in Britain. The ancestral home, number 12 Grimmauld Place, housed an enormous tapestry recording generations of Blacks, many of whom had been blasted off the family tree for marrying Muggles or expressing non-Slytherin ideals. Sirius Black, of course, became the family's most famous rebel. Sorted into Gryffindor instead of Slytherin, he rejected his parents' Orion and Walburga's obsession with blood purity and fought for the Order of the Phoenix. In contrast, his cousins Bellatrix Lestrange and Narcissa Malfoy remained firmly on the opposite side, both embracing Voldemort's ideology. The irony is that despite their fierce protection of purity, the Black Line ended with Sirius's death, the most poetic punishment possible for a family that spent centuries obsessed with legacy. The female line married into the Weasleys, Potters, and Malfoys. The Bulstrode family managed to get on the Sacred 28 list, but just barely. They were mostly pure blood, though it didn't take long for the line to begin branching through marriages with Muggles and half-bloods. The proof comes from Millicent Bulstrode, a Slytherin contemporary of Harry Potter, who was confirmed as a half-blood. Millicent became best known for an unfortunate mix-up with Hermione Granger in the Chamber of Secrets. when Hermione accidentally added Millicent's cat hair to her polyjuice potion, transforming into a feline hybrid instead of her target. It's unclear whether the Bulstrodes ever held strong political opinions about blood purity, but later generations clearly didn't align with the Sacred 28 ideology. By the time Millicent arrived at Hogwarts, the family's pure reputation had long since disappeared. The Burke family was a well-known pure-blood lineage, most prominently represented by Caractacus Burke, co-founder of Borgin and Burke's in Diagon Alley. Think of it as the eBay of evil. The shop became infamous for dealing in cursed and dark magical artifacts, including Salazar Slytherin's locket, which Burke bought from Voldemort's desperate mother, Merope Gaunt, for next to nothing. The Burkes had a knack for identifying valuable magical objects and exploiting them. Their shop later played an important role in The Half-Blood Prince, when Draco Malfoy used one of their vanishing cabinets to smuggle Death Eaters into Hogwarts. Another notable member, Elizabeth Burke, appears in one of the portraits in the Slytherin dungeon at Hogwarts. She was known for advising young Slytherins to be unpleasant to Muggleborns, which tells you exactly where the family stood on blood politics. If any family on the Sacred 28 list exemplified opportunism over morality, it was the Burkes, loyal to whoever had the gold, not necessarily to the cause. The Carrows were another pure-blood family with an extensive dark legacy. Their lineage dates back at least to the 1920s, when one of their relatives aligned with Gellert Grindelwald. But the family's true infamy came decades later with Alecto and Amicus Carrow, siblings and enthusiastic Death Eaters. When Voldemort took control of Hogwarts, Alecto was appointed Professor of Muggle Studies, while Amicus took over defense against the dark arts, both using their positions to torture students under the guise of discipline. Their actions were so horrific that even by Death Eater standards, they stood out as sadistic fanatics. The Carrows demonstrated how the Sacred 28's obsession with blood superiority could evolve into total fanaticism. Ironically, after the war, their pure-blood lineage was the least interesting thing about them, overshadowed by the simple fact that everyone despised them. When even other Death Eaters think you're too much, that's saying something. The Crouch family was one of the oldest and most respected pure-blood dynasties in Britain, but their downfall became one of the darkest stories in magical history. They were distant relatives of the Blacks, Yaxleys, Longbottoms, and Weasleys, forming part of the tangled web of wizarding aristocracy. The most prominent figure was Bartemius Crouch Sr., the rigid, rule-obsessed head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. His dedication to order and punishment made him a powerful ministry figure and a terrible father. His son, Barty Crouch Jr., was a devoted Death Eater. After being imprisoned in Azkaban, he escaped with his mother's help through a polyjuice potion swap, a decision that led to catastrophic consequences. Disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, he infiltrated Hogwarts during the Tri-Wizard Tournament, manipulated the Goblet of Fire, and delivered Harry Potter directly to Voldemort. Barty Jr.'s eventual capture and the Dementor's kiss brought the Crouch family to extinction. A lineage once synonymous with discipline and respectability ended in disgrace, proving that pure blood doesn't mean pure judgment. The Fawleys were a quieter member of the Sacred 28, known more for political influence than scandal. Hector Fawley served as Minister for Magic from the 1920s to the 1930s during the tense years preceding Grindelwald's War. His leadership was short-lived and largely unremarkable, which in political terms is already something. Most Fawley family members were sorted into Hufflepuff House, suggesting a mild temperament compared to their heavy-handed Slytherin peers. Despite their pure-blood status, there's no record of them engaging in extremist activities or Death Eater involvement. And by the late 20th century, the family name had quietly disappeared from prominence. The Flint family's history stretches far back. though most wizards today associate the name with one person, Marcus Flint, captain of the Slytherin Quidditch team during Harry Potter's early years. But the Flint's connections to powerful families ran deeper. Ursula Flint, for example, married Phineas Nigellus Black, linking their lineage to the House of Black. Even earlier, Josephina Flint served as Minister for Magic in the early 1800s, one of the rare examples of a woman holding the position at that time. The Flints maintained their pure blood status, but never achieved the infamy of the Malfoys or the reverence of the Blacks. Their legacy is mainly one of steady Slytherin ambition, cunning enough to remain relevant, quiet enough to avoid disgrace. And considering Marcus Flint's brute force style on the Quidditch pitch, it's safe to say that subtlety was never a family trait. The Gaunt family was perhaps the darkest and most infamous lineage on the entire Sacred 28 list. Direct descendants of Salazar, Slytherin, and Cadmus Peverell, the Gaunts embodied everything wrong with pure blood obsession, arrogance, isolation, and inbreeding. Their determination to preserve the bloodline led them to marry within the family for generations, resulting in severe mental and physical decline. By the late 19th century, the once powerful house had fallen into poverty, living in a ramshackle shack on the outskirts of Little Hangleton. Among the most notorious Gaunts were Marvolo Gaunt, a violent patriarch obsessed with his ancestry, Merope Gaunt, his abused daughter and mother of Tom Riddle, and Morfinn Gaunt, his disturbed brother who took the blame for a murder committed by his nephew, Voldemort himself. The Gaunts also carried one of Slytherin's greatest treasures, his serpent-engraved locket, later transformed into a Horcrux. Their ability to speak Parseltongue was the last surviving vestige of Slytherin's lineage. Though in the end, all that remained of the Gaunts' noble heritage was a madman who destroyed everything they had always lived for. The Greengrass family stood out among the Sacred 28 by making a surprising turn away from fanaticism. Initially firmly pure blood, later generations became notably more progressive. This shift was most evident in Astoria Greengrass, who married Draco Malfoy. After the war, Astoria openly rejected the anti-Muggle beliefs her ancestors once held, even raising her son Scorpius with compassion and tolerance, to her in-laws' dismay. The Greengrasses maintained a reputation for elegance and restraint, never openly aligning with Voldemort or the Death Eaters. If anything, they symbolized the silent reform of old bloodlines, proof that not every pure family ended in ruin or arrogance. Their inclusion in the Sacred 28 may have once been a mark of honor, but by Astoria's generation's time, it was little more than a historical embarrassment. The Lestranges were pure-blood elitism personified in human form. Wealthy, ancient, and proud of their inbreeding, their family tree intertwined with several others on the list, including the Blacks and Rosiers, maintaining what they saw as the sacred lineage. Historically, they had a fascination with dark magic and produced several notorious figures, including Rodolphus Lestrange, a 19th century minister for magic, and later Lestrange, a Hogwarts student whose tragic story unfolded during Fantastic Beasts, but the name became infamous through Bellatrix Lestrange, born Bellatrix Black. She married Rodolphus Lestrange purely to maintain her pure-blood status, marrying for status, not love, though her true devotion was reserved for Voldemort. Together, the Lestranges became two of his most loyal and unhinged Death Eaters, participating in torture, murder, and the downfall of countless families. The Lestrange family's obsession with purity eventually mirrored their fate, consumed by their own darkness and left without heirs to continue their legacy. Despite all their claims of superiority, the Lestranges managed to prove only that madness can, indeed, be hereditary. The Longbottom family was one of the oldest pure-blood houses in Britain, a lineage respected for honor rather than elitism. While some families clung to blood purity as a form of superiority, the Longbottoms built their legacy on service. Many became auras, or prominent ministry officials, known for their bravery and integrity. The most famous member, of course, is our hero Neville Longbottom, who began his life at Hogwarts as the shy, forgetful boy constantly losing his toad, and ended as a war hero who destroyed Voldemort's final Horcrux, Nagini. Neville's parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom, were tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange and her fellow Death Eaters, an event that defined Neville's life. Raised by his stern grandmother Augusta, he grew up under the shadow of expectation, but finally rose above it, proving that true courage has nothing to do with bloodlines. The Longbottoms never exhibited fanaticism about their ancestry. Their inclusion in the Sacred 28 was only by heritage, not by ideology. In a world full of prejudice, the Longbottoms quietly represented what pure-blood families could have been if they had chosen decency over arrogance. The Macmillan family also traced their roots deep into wizarding history. Though technically a pure-blood house, they were known for neutrality rather than extremism. Their most recognizable descendant, Ernie Macmillan, was a loyal Hufflepuff and member of Dumbledore's army. He often reminded others that his family was pure blood for generations, but unlike Draco Malfoy, he said it more with pride than prejudice. Throughout history, the Macmillans maintained a reputation for respectability without fanaticism. During Voldemort's rise, they openly supported Albus Dumbledore and opposed Death Eater ideology, showing that blood purity didn't need to mean purity of cruelty. The Macmillans proved you could appear on the Sacred 28 list without needing an arm tattoo or a family tree full of inbred lunatics. Arguably, the most iconic name of all the Sacred 28, the Malfoy family embodied everything pure blood was supposed to represent: power, wealth, and manipulation. They lived in Malfoy Manor, an expansive estate that hosted everyone from ministry officials to Death Eaters. Their lineage dates back to the Norman conquest, and the family always had a knack for staying close to power, first flattering Muggle kings and then working through the Ministry of Magic. They were known for political cunning, influence, and an almost allergic reaction to humility. Lucius Malfoy, his wife Narcissa, and their son Draco personify the modern Malfoys. Lucius served as one of Voldemort's most visible Death Eaters until the family realized that loyalty to the Dark Lord was a bad retirement plan. At the Battle of Hogwarts, the Malfoys' loyalty had shifted from ideology to self-preservation, a survival tactic that ultimately saved them. Ironically, while the Malfoys spent centuries guarding their pure blood, it was Draco's marriage to Astoria Greengrass that redeemed the family name. The once feared Malfoys ended up raising one of the kindest children in the wizarding world. Irony at its finest, the Knott family is one of the most secretive and least documented lineages within the Sacred 28, but their influence is profound. Their name carries weight in Slytherin history, and several generations of Knotts were educated at Hogwarts under that banner. The most notable modern descendant is Theodore Knott, a quiet but intelligent student in Draco Malfoy's year, known for his aptitude in arithmancy and defense against the dark arts. Though he largely avoided the spotlight, his father, Mr. Knott, was a confirmed Death Eater, loyal to Voldemort during both wars. The family patriarch, Cantankerous Knott, is widely believed to have authored the Pure Blood Directory itself, the document that ranked the Sacred 28. Whether he actually wrote it or not, his reputation as a bitter elitist made him the perfect suspect. The Knotts perfectly represent the type of family that inspired the entire list: proud, isolationist, and convinced that blood purity equaled worth. Ironically, their survival after the war depended less on their pedigree and more on how quietly they could disappear into the background. The Ollivanders are one of the oldest wizarding families in existence. So old, in fact, that their lineage predates the founding of the Ministry of Magic. The name has been synonymous with wand-making since 382 BC, when the first Ollivander opened shop in Diagon Alley. The family founder, Gerbold Ollivander, is believed to have brought the art of wand-making to Britain during the Roman occupation. Over the centuries, the Ollivanders refined their craft to perfection, becoming the undisputed masters of wand lore. Their descendant, Garrick Ollivander, was the most famous wand-maker of the modern era. He personally created the wands of Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort, twin phoenix feathercores, linking their owners' fates forever. The Ollivanders never showed political extremism or prejudice. They were purebloods by birth, but craftsmen by trade, respected by all sides. While other families struggled to prove superiority, the Ollivanders quietly supplied everyone with the tools to fight each other. The Parkinson family was another of the ancient pure-blood clans, though far less distinguished than they liked to believe. Their reputation peaked, or possibly hit rock bottom, with Pansy Parkinson, an arrogant, sharp-tongued Slytherin student infatuated with Draco Malfoy. Pansy's sneering attitude toward Muggle-borns and her infamous cry to hand Potter over to Voldemort during the Battle of Hogwarts cemented her family's reputation for cowardice rather than courage. Historically, the Parkinsons had political presence. Perseus Parkinson served as Minister for Magic in the 1700s, but that influence faded over time. In the modern era, their name carried more gossip than glory. They were the kind of family that loved the prestige of the Sacred 28 list, but contributed little of substance to wizarding history, more known for insults than innovation. The Prewett family maintained pure blood status, but rejected the elitism that came with it. They were closely related to the Weasleys, and their values aligned far more with decency and courage than ideology. One of the best-known Prewetts was Molly Weasley, born Molly Prewett, who married Arthur Weasley, a union that likely horrified any remaining blood purists. Molly's brothers, Gideon and Fabian Prewett, were members of the Order of the Phoenix during the First Wizarding War. They fought valiantly against Death Eaters and were eventually killed by them, a loss so significant that Alastor Moody later kept their names engraved on a commemorative clock. The Prewetts were described as having the distinctive red hair and large noses that later became trademarks of the Weasley clan. Though technically part of the Sacred 28, the Prewetts made clear that blood purity meant nothing compared to bravery. Their legacy continues, not through ancient records, but through Molly's family, who helped save the wizarding world while the so-called noble families tore it apart. The Rosiers were an ancient and powerful pureblood family, believed to have French origins. Unlike some of their quieter peers, they were proudly involved in dark politics. During the early 20th century, a Rosier was among Gellert Grindelwald's supporters, foreshadowing the family's long association with dark wizards. Decades later, Evan Rosier emerged as one of Voldemort's Death Eaters, notorious for dueling with Mad-Eye Moody, during which he managed to remove part of Moody's nose before being killed. The Rosiers prided themselves on their elegance and pure lineage, but fell into the same trap as many others, believing their ancestry made them untouchable. In the end, it didn't. Their bloodline may have been ancient, but at the conclusion of the Second Wizarding War, their influence was nothing more than another cautionary footnote in the history of arrogance. The Rowell family occupied a strange middle ground among the Sacred 28, ancient and respected but morally flexible. An early member, Damocles Rowell, served as Minister for Magic in the 1700s and implemented harsh laws against Muggles. His tenure was marked by paranoia and persecution, setting the tone for how the Rowells would later be perceived. Centuries later, Thorfinn Rowell followed the family tradition of poor decision-making by becoming a Death Eater under Voldemort. Known for brute strength and limited intellect, he was more enforcer than strategist, a wizard who preferred destruction to dialogue. Adding to the dark legacy, Euphemia Roll later became the guardian of Delphi, the daughter of Voldemort and Bellatrix Lestrange, ensuring the Rowell family name remained entwined with the darkest threads of wizarding history. The Rowells never seemed to learn that heritage doesn't guarantee wisdom, just a longer list of terrible ancestors. The Selwyn family was a high-status, pure-blood lineage, often mentioned alongside other elite wizarding houses. Their name carried enough weight that even Lord Voldemort once referenced it as an example of noble blood. Historically, the Selwyns were associated with the Ministry and held positions of influence. Though not much direct documentation survives, what's clear is that at least one Selwyn became a Death Eater, participating in the kidnapping of Luna Lovegood during Voldemort's reign. Interestingly, Dolores Umbridge once claimed to descend from the Selwyns, though this was never verified. Considering her pathological need for authority and pure-blood posturing, it's not hard to imagine she simply invented the connection for credibility. In short, the Selwyns were the self-important aristocrats of the magical world. High-ranking, heavy-handed, and ultimately high-risk when it came to surviving the post-war world. The Shacklebolt family had pure-blood heritage, but none of the arrogance that usually came with it. They were respected rather than feared, and their most famous member, Kingsley Shacklebolt, personified everything the Sacred 28 should have represented but didn't: integrity, ability, and equality. Kingsley was a top-tier Auror, member of the Order of the Phoenix, and later served as Minister for Magic after Voldemort's defeat. During the Second Wizarding War, he even acted as bodyguard to the Muggle Prime Minister, proving his loyalty to the greater good rather than outdated ideology. There's no record of the Shacklebolts ever embracing blood purity or the Death Eater agenda. They were the rare example of a pure-blood family whose reputation actually improved over time, not through propaganda or wealth, but through consistent moral backbone. Very little is known about the Shafiq family, making them one of the most mysterious entries in the Sacred 28. They were confirmed as pure bloods when the directory was published in the early 1930s, but after that, they practically disappeared from public record. It's speculated that the Shafiqs had Middle Eastern origins, as their name appears linguistically distinct from the primarily British families on the list. Some historians believe they were an ancient lineage of traders deeply connected to global magical commerce, long before the Ministry standardized international cooperation. Despite their obscurity, inclusion in the Sacred 28 implies they once held considerable prestige. However, their disappearance from wizarding society and lack of any known descendants in modern Britain suggests the family either married out or moved abroad. In the world of pure-blood elitism, the Shafiq's quiet exit may have been the smartest move anyone on the list ever made. The Slughorn family was wealthy, pure-blood, and unusually pragmatic about their place in the wizarding world. Unlike most of their peers, they never brandished their lineage as weapon or shield, preferring charm, social strategy, and influence to outright arrogance. The most famous member, Horace Slughorn, served as both potions master and head of Slytherin House at Hogwarts, first in the 1940s and again during Harry Potter's time. Horace had a soft spot for talented students and famously cultivated a social circle known as the Slug Club, composed of those he believed destined for greatness. Among his members were both Lily Evans and Tom Riddle, a pairing that perfectly illustrates Slughorn's neutrality and occasional poor judgment. While the family was undeniably pure blood, Horace showed tolerance toward Muggleborns and half-bloods, even expressing guilt over having revealed critical information to Voldemort about Horcruxes. The Slughorns may have been on the Sacred 28 list, but they were proof that ambition didn't always lead to fanaticism. Sometimes it just led to a very exclusive dinner party. The Travers family was another long-standing pure-blood lineage, but unlike the Slughorns, they were far less concerned with charm. The Travers name became synonymous with brutality and loyalty to Voldemort. A Death Eater known simply as Travers participated in multiple murders during the First Wizarding War, most notably that of the McKinnon family, who were allies of the Order of the Phoenix. The Travers resurfaced again during the Second Wizarding War, proving the family had learned absolutely nothing from history. Another descendant, Torquil Travers, later served as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement in the 1990s, suggesting the family maintained political influence even after their reputation was tarnished. The Travers lineage demonstrates one of the recurring patterns of the Sacred 28, using their influence to commit atrocities and then using that same influence to stay out of Azkaban. Few families on the Sacred 28 list were more despised by pure-blood supremacists than the Weasleys. Despite their impeccable ancestry, the Weasleys were proud blood traitors, wizards who actively rejected blood purity ideology and treated Muggles and Muggleborns as equals. Living at the Burrow near Ottery St. Catchpole, the family was known for their warmth, humour and lack of wealth, three qualities that horrified the Malfoys. Arthur Weasley, a ministry employee obsessed with Muggle inventions, and Molly Weasley, a formidable matriarch, raised 7 children: Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred, George, Ron and Ginny. Nearly all of them joined the fight against Voldemort, with the family's loyalty to Dumbledore's army and the Order of the Phoenix cementing their status as moral opposites of the Malfoys and Lestranges. Though ridiculed for their poverty, the Weasleys' compassion, courage and unity made them one of the most respected families in wizarding history. Ironically, the so-called blood traitors ended up being the only truly noble house on the entire Sacred 28 list. The Yaxley family was one of the darkest legacies among the Sacred 28, a pure blood lineage steeped in loyalty to Voldemort and magical superiority ideology. Though few details about their early history exist, their reputation in the modern era was defined by one man, Corbin Yaxley. Corbin served as a Death Eater during both Wizarding Wars and rose to a senior position within the Department of Magical Law Enforcement after infiltrating the Ministry during Voldemort's takeover. He was a cunning bureaucrat, the kind who smiled while approving laws that ruined lives. Yaxley personally participated in raids, arrests and torture, acting as Voldemort's administrative enforcer within the Ministry. After the Dark Lord's fall, he was captured and imprisoned in Azkaban, though some accounts suggest surviving members of his family remained at large. The Yaxleys prided themselves on their purity, but like many of their peers, that pride turned to poison. Their bloodline's obsession with status led them not to honor but to infamy. In the end, they became the perfect cautionary tale for every name on the Sacred 28 list. Proof that blood may endure, but integrity doesn't always survive with it. And those were all the families of the Sacred 28, the so-called purest bloodlines in wizarding history. But now that you know each of these families in depth, it's worth reflecting on what purity really means. Does pure blood guarantee superiority? The history of these 28 families shows us something completely different. Some, like the Weasleys, Longbottoms and Shacklebolts, used their ancient lineage as a platform for good, defending equality and justice even when it put them at odds with their own social circles. Others, like the Malfoys and Lestranges, allowed obsession with purity to consume them, transforming them into instruments of terror and oppression. What makes this story even more fascinating is realizing that many of these families were interconnected through strategic marriages. The Blacks, for example, had ties to practically every other pure-blood family. This web of family connections created a sort of wizarding oligarchy, where power and influence were carefully maintained within a closed circle. But this same strategy that was supposed to preserve their strength ended up being their downfall. Inbreeding led to mental instability, as seen in the Gaunts, Arrogance led to complacency, as demonstrated by the Malfoys at the Battle of Hogwarts, and blind fanaticism led to destruction, as happened with the Lestranges and Carrows. It's interesting to note that the Pure Blood Directory, likely written by Cantankerous Knott in the 1930s, was published during a period of growing tension in the wizarding world. Grindelwald was gaining power in Europe, and there was a widespread sense that the world was changing too fast. For many of these ancient families, the publication of the list was a desperate attempt to cling to the past, to create a sort of exclusive club that could resist the tides of change. But history shows us that this resistance was doomed to fail. What happened to these families in the following decades is a fascinating study in choices and consequences. When Voldemort emerged offering a vision of pure blood supremacy, many of these families had to make a choice. Some, like the Averys, Carrows and Yaxleys, enthusiastically embraced his ideology, seeing in him the opportunity to restore what they considered the natural order of things. Others, like the Weasleys and Longbottoms, recognized Voldemort for what he truly was, a hypocritical half-blood using prejudice as a tool for personal power. And still others, like the Malfoys, played both sides, always trying to ensure they ended up on the winning side. The cruel irony is that Voldemort, the greatest champion of blood purity, was himself a half-blood. His mother, Merope Gaunt, came from one of the purest families on the list, a direct descendant of Salazar Slytherin. But his father was a Muggle. Voldemort spent his entire life trying to erase that half of his heritage, building an entire identity around denying who he really was. And in the process, he dragged many of these ancient families into ruin along with him. Looking at the final fate of these 28 families, we see a clear pattern. Those that survived and prospered were the ones that adapted, that recognized a person's value lies not in their lineage, but in their choices and actions. The Greengrasses evolved, with Astoria actively rejecting the beliefs her ancestors held. The Weasleys never bought into the ideology in the first place, remaining true to their values of equality and decency. Even the Malfoys, despite all their mistakes, eventually found redemption through the next generation. On the other hand, families that clung rigidly to blood purity often faced extinction. The Gaunts self-destructed through inbreeding and isolation. The Blacks ended with Sirius, the last male heir, dying childless. The Lestranges were consumed by their own evil. The Crouches were destroyed by the consequences of their own rigidity and cruelty. Family after family discovered you can't build a future by only looking at the past. What the Pure Blood Directory really represents, when you look closely, isn't a list of superiority, but an inventory of fear. Fear of change, fear of losing power, fear that the magical world could function perfectly well without these ancient families at the top. And like many things born of fear, it ended up creating exactly the problems it intended to prevent. The obsession with purity led to wars that cost countless lives, divided communities, and nearly destroyed wizarding society entirely. Today, generations after the Directory's publication, and decades after Voldemort's final fall, these 28 families occupy a complicated place in wizarding history. Some are remembered with respect, others with shame, and still others with a complex mixture of both. But all of them serve as a reminder of a fundamental lesson. Blood doesn't determine character. The choices we make, the values we hold, and how we treat others, that's what truly matters. The Sacred 28 list was created to divide, to separate the pure from the impure, to create hierarchy where there should be equality. But in the end, it only proved that blood purity is an illusion. Every family on the list eventually married Muggles or Muggle-borns or died trying to avoid it. Harry Potter's family tree, for example, includes the Blacks through Sirius as godfather and the Weasleys through his marriage to Ginny. His own son, Albus Severus, carries the names of two of history's greatest wizards, one of whom, Severus Snape, came from a half-blood family. The true lesson of the sacred 28 isn't about who is pure or impure, superior or inferior. It's about how obsession with these artificial distinctions can corrupt even the most ancient and respected families. It's about how fear of the other, of the different, can transform capable witches and wizards into monsters. And it's about how, in the end, it's our choices, not our blood, that define who we truly are. When Dumbledore told Harry that it is our choices that show who we truly are, far more than our abilities, he could have easily added, far more than our lineage. The heroes of the Second Wizarding War came from all types of backgrounds. Harry Potter was a half-blood, Hermione Granger was Muggle-born, and together they helped defeat a movement that insisted only pure bloods mattered. The 28 families on this list gave us some of the greatest heroes in wizarding history, like Neville Longbottom and Kingsley Shacklebolt, who proved that blood purity can coexist with purity of heart. But they also gave us some of the greatest villains, like Bellatrix Lestrange and the Carrow siblings, who used their ancient lineage as an excuse for unimaginable cruelty. The difference between them wasn't in the blood running through their veins, but in the choices they made about how to use the power and privilege that blood granted them. So the next time you hear someone talk about the sacred 28, remember, this list isn't a hall of fame. It's a time capsule, capturing a moment when the wizarding world was on the brink of massive change, and some families chose to resist at any cost. Some of these families learned and evolved. Others were consumed by their own arrogance, but all of them taught us valuable lessons about the dangers of prejudice, the power of choices, and the fundamental truth that in the end, we're all just witches and wizards trying to find our way in a complicated world. And with that, we've reached the end of this deep journey through the 28 sacred pure-blood families. I hope you've learned something new, that you've seen these families in a new light, and that you've reflected on the lessons their stories teach us. If you enjoyed this in-depth content about the Harry Potter universe, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more detailed analyses like this one. We're almost reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your help makes all the difference. Leave a comment saying which of these families you found most interesting and why. And if you want to understand how these same bloodlines fought and died for their ideals in the 3 Wizarding Wars, check out our next video where we explore each conflict in detail. Until next time, and remember, it's our choices, not our blood, that determine who we truly are.